It began with a leak. A red folder marked Africa Realignment Strategy. Inside, proposals, contracts, signatures. And one voice memo, a familiar voice. Control the minerals, control the region. The voice was unmistakable. Donald Trump. Across the world, Ibrahim Traoré read every word. And he didn't blink. Traoré didn't call for war. He didn't rush to media. He circled one phrase in silence. Destabilize where necessary. That line wasn't policy. It was a spark. And sparks, if left alone, become wildfires. He packed one suit and left for New York. No team, no press. Just one speech no one saw coming. At the UN, whispers spread. Traoré, here? He's not scheduled, but he didn't wait for a slot. He walked past red ropes. Through murmurs and unease, delegates stiffened, security paused. And then came the silence, the kind that signals. A storm is approaching. The General Assembly doors opened. Trump's envoy stood at the podium, polished, grinning, rehearsed. Our mission in Africa is stability and partnership. Traoré listened, his eyes unmoved, his silence louder than any rebuttal. And when they offered him the floor, he didn't hesitate. The next 10 minutes would change everything. He stepped forward, no paper in hand, no teleprompter, just the weight of every forgotten voice. He looked into the cameras. You brought security. We buried it. You promised peace. We got silence. And now you want respect? You can't dominate people. And call it diplomacy. If you believe truth is stronger than power, subscribe now. Because this voice isn't finished yet. No one interrupted, not because they agreed, but because no one dared. You send aid with one hand and arm dealers with the other. One delegate shifted, another looked down. We don't want your supervision. We want your absence. Traoré's voice wasn't raised, but the room was shrinking. Cameras clicked. World leaders froze. Newsrooms scrambled to broadcast live. He continued, you drew borders. Now you draw contracts. We were colonies. Now we're markets. But we are not for sale. Some applauded. Others stood still. Everyone listened. Back in Washington, advisors scrambled, pulled a feed. It's too late. On Twitter, clips spread like fire. Traoré didn't flinch. He looked at Trump's delegation and then said, we don't fear isolation. We fear forgetting who we are. The silence that followed was political and personal. A journalist whispered, this feels like a revolution. And it was, but with no weapons, only words and one man, who didn't shout but pierced. If your definition of peace requires obedience, we choose unrest. One by one, people stood, some in anger, some in awe. Traoré paused. The last line hovered. He looked at the hall. Then the camera. One breath. We won't let silence become our signature. He placed the mic down. No bow, no smile. Just footsteps, steady, slow. World shaking ... and behind him, a silence louder than applause. Outside the UN, hundreds waited. Some clapped, some chanted. One held a sign. Silence broke today. News anchors debated. Reckless? Historic? But inside Burkina Faso, no one debated anything. They knew. Their voice had just echoed. Around the world. At the White House, Trump was briefed. He didn't flinch. So he wants attention? We'll give him consequences. Sanctions were drafted. Aid suspended. An emergency press conference called. But the internet had already chosen a side, and it wasn't quiet. Meanwhile, in a village school, children watched the speech. One whispered, "That's our president?" The teacher smiled. Yes. And he didn't raise a fist, he raised a mirror. The screen froze. Still image, still power. World leaders called him. Some praised, some warned. He answered none. Instead, he returned home. No parade, no speech. Just walked through the Capitol, among the people. No guards. Because his protection was trust. A French newspaper read, Burkina Faso's president declares verbal war. An African paper replied, no, he declared himself alive. Suddenly, nations with no voice found one. And they spoke in Traoré's tone, not with volume, but with weight. A young poet wrote, he didn't speak for us. He reminded us we could. Her lines went viral. So did her face. And Traoré? He riposted it with one word, begin. If his voice gave you yours, tap like, and let it begin again. The next UN session was quiet. No one wanted to follow him. But one Caribbean delegate stood. Mr. President, he said, you didn't just speak truth, you made it contagious. Applause.
Real this time, and still.
Traoré only nodded. Anonymous threats arrived. Cyberattacks surged. Traoré's emails leaked, but revealed nothing except honesty. The world tried to break him with noise, but his power was never in what he shouted. It was in what he endured, without a sound. An activist asked, what if this escalates? Traoré answered, then let it. You're not afraid of reaction? No, I'd fear more the day. Our children have no reaction at all. And with that, the fear shifted. In the quiet halls of the UN, his chair remained unclaimed, not out of absence, but reverence. Some said he changed policy. Others said he changed tone. But in every hallway, one quote lingered on walls and screens. You can't dominate people and call it diplomacy. A musician in Senegal sampled his speech. A protester in Colombia wore his quote on her chest. An elder in Laos whispered, he reminded us silence isn't weakness. Across continents, he didn't become a headline. He became a movement. Late one night, Traoré stood on his balcony. No security. No advisors. Just the wind and the weight. Someone asked, how does it feel? He replied, like I opened my mouth. And a million voices came out. Back in the U.S., Trump doubled down. No more deals. No more aid, but something strange happened. American youth reposted Traoré's speech. Respect him or fear him. He spoke what others swallowed, and for once, Washington couldn't control the narrative. A news anchor asked, do you regret saying it? Traoré smiled. No, even with the fallout, especially because of it. Why? Because some truths deserve consequences. African presidents convened, old rivals, new allies. For the first time, they weren't summoned ... they summoned. And the first chair reserved was for Traoré. He didn't attend. He sent one message. Don't wait for me, lead. In Burkina Faso, his approval soared, not because of promises, but because he broke the script. One man said, we don't follow him because he's right. We follow him because he's real. A documentary team requested access. They wanted footage, statements, emotion. Traoré declined. What I needed to say was already heard. What's left is to live by it. A professor wrote, this is no longer about diplomacy. It's about dignity. His students printed the quote on T-shirts, notebooks, posters, and one quietly added, Traoré gave us a new language, the kind you feel, before you understand it. In a hospital, a child recovering from surgery held a toy mic. He looked at the nurse and said, I'm going to say it too. Say what? We are not for sale. She froze and then smiled, like hope had just spoken. At midnight, the lights in the Capitol flickered off. But in one building, Traoré sat pen in hand, writing not laws, but letters, not to presidents, but to people, because he knew a voice raised once needs to be echoed 1,000 times. An art exhibit opened in Nairobi, Words That Woke Us. The centerpiece, a screen playing Traoré's speech on loop. Below it, just 3 words, not for sale. Visitors wept, not because it hurt, but because someone had finally said it. In a debate hall in Brazil, a student shouted, "Speak like Traoré, not louder, not angrier, just truer," and everyone understood what that meant, because truth, once heard, refuses to be unheard. A tech founder offered him millions for an exclusive interview. He declined. "I'm not an influencer, but you can shape minds. Then let them shape mine too." The silence after was worth more than any payment. Traoré visited a refugee camp. No cameras, no script. A child ran to him with a paper. It was his quote, hand-copied. He knelt, read it slowly, and said, "Thank you for carrying my voice further than I ever could." In Paris, a protest banner read, "Your silence was a luxury. Ours was survival." The crowd erupted, not in anger, but in applause, because sometimes rage sounds like clarity. A university assigned his speech as required reading. One student wrote, "He didn't teach politics, he taught presence." Another added, "He showed that silence can be armor." If his words meant something to you, drop your favorite line in the comments. Let them echo beyond borders. An interviewer asked, "What scares you most?" He answered, "That our children will whisper what we were too afraid to say." She looked stunned, then wrote the line down. Twice. A diplomat cornered him. "You're disrupting global relations." Traoré raised an eyebrow. If truth disrupts them, they weren't relations, they were contracts. And with that, he walked away. No need to win, just to finish saying what needed to be said. In a cathedral in Ghana, his name was whispered. Between prayers, not as a saint, but as a sign that courage still walked. In flesh and blood, we've seen miracles, but this one speaks. In the night, he stood by his window. No guards, no noise. Only the echo of his own words, returning to him like an old friend. He smiled, not for fame, but because he no longer carried truth alone. A small cafe in Turkey changed its Wi-Fi name to "We Are Not For Sale." In South Korea, subway screens flashed his quotes. In Egypt, a mural went up. Traoré's silhouette, painted over a lion's shadow, and underneath, one voice. All of us. At a closed-door summit, a European leader sighed. He said what we never dared to. Another replied, "And now we have to answer." For once, power had to speak to truth, not the other way around. At a closed-door summit, a European leader sighed. He said what we never dared to. Another replied, "And now we have to answer." For once, power had to speak to truth, not the other way around. A child in a war zone held a broken phone. Replaying the speech, she couldn't understand the words, but the tone. It calmed her, because even across language, resonance speaks louder than translation. In an old office, a translator subtitled the speech. In 57 languages. When asked why, he said, "Because every village deserves to hear courage in their own tongue." He didn't charge a cent. A critic called it populist theater. Another called it dangerous poetry. Traoré called it none of that ... I just spoke what I couldn't ignore. If that's politics, then maybe truth finally got elected. In a classroom in Mali, a boy was asked to describe a leader. He drew no crown, no suit, just a mouth open, and next to it, an ear, because real leaders don't just speak. They echo. A documentary finally aired, not of Traoré, but of the people who changed because of him, miners who unionized, mothers who organized, students who memorized lines not from textbooks, but from him. In a gallery in New York, his image hung beside Melke, Mandela, and Gandhi. Below it, a question: what if silence was never weakness? Visitors didn't leave comments. They just stood, thinking. In his private journal, Traoré wrote just one line that week. The echo will always outlive the voice. He closed the book. No fanfare, no microphone, because sometimes legacy writes itself. Between the pauses, a child asked him, "Are you famous?" He knelt down. "I don't think so, but everyone talks about you." Then talk about what I said, not me. And the child, without knowing it, learned how a real voice creates thousands more. A girl stood at a youth conference, shaking, nervous. She began with, "My name is Amina, and I am not for sale." The room erupted, not because she was loud, but because she was real, and that was enough. In a prison yard, a man mouthed Traoré's lines to himself. He didn't have a phone, no paper, but he remembered. Truth doesn't need permission. It needs courage. Every day he repeated it. Like prayer, like protection. A statue was suggested. He declined. "I don't need a face in stone." Then what? Build libraries. Put books in children's hands. That's how I want to be remembered. They did. All across the continent. Years later, a new leader quoted him. Another tried to imitate him. But the world could tell one spoke from memory, the other from belief. And only belief builds revolutions. One day, Traoré sat in the same seat where he had delivered that speech. No cameras, just him. He whispered to the empty room. "Did we move anything?" Outside, a child ran by yelling. "We are not for sale," he smiled. That was enough. He grew quieter, but the world didn't forget, because now others spoke in their languages, with their truths, with a fire he once lit and handed forward, without asking anything in return. His last public appearance was unannounced, a schoolyard. He watched children read. One looked up and asked, "Are you the man who spoke?" He nodded. The child said, "Then I'll speak too." And just like that, the story reset. A plaque was placed at the UN, no photo, no title, just words. You can't dominate people and call it diplomacy. And beneath it, in smaller letters, Ibrahim Traoré Global Power Clash 2025. If this story stirred something in you, share it. Let this voice become 1,000 more. Truth doesn't echo on its own. We are the echo. In the quiet of his home, he lit a candle, not for memory, but for motion, a reminder that silence, when spoken with truth, can light entire generations, and his flame still burned. And one day, long after he was gone, a child stood at a podium. Different place, different time, but same words. We are not for sale. The world clapped, but more importantly, it listened.